The story of Candyman is so perennial, and that's part of the reason why it's exciting to tell it in any time period. From the origin of the story itself in the context of the first film, in the 1890s to now, what we're talking about, I think, is the cycles of violence and how history repeats itself and how we collectively grieve and collectively process trauma, which is through stories. So I think it's always a time to tell a story like Candyman, which is, kind of the big tragedy of the tale in the first place.
I'm very interested in terms of like stories about Black trauma and how it affects us, how we walk around with it, and how we're trying to seek some sort of, I don't know, retribution, trying to seek some I don't know, something to help us continue to walk tall, So I think that he's searching, and Burke is a character that's been waiting for his opportunity to say you can never forget the names of those that have been killed. So I think very much so, it's very much indicative of what we are saying the names of, Philando Castile, you name it, of Black men struck down in our community, but community members and leaders, you name it, and how important it is to remember that, to not gloss over it, but you have to remember that in order to move forward.
I kept Anthony very close to myself. I'm an artist, I'm sensitive, I'm very ambitious, and I know what it's like to want to be hot one moment and to kind of cool off and to try to create another moment, to be looking for something, I also know what it's like to be a newcomer in a place and to be searching for inspiration. And so I really leaned into those aspects of myself, of what it's like to be, to feel displaced, and what it's like to be ambitious, and also to allow curiosity to sort of get me into a lot of trouble. When Anthony wanders out into Cabrini Green and decides to hop the fence and to go after something and to see what's on the other side of the fence, so to speak. That's very much like my own personality, like my own nature. So it's been fun kind of searching into myself and really letting my softer, maybe more sensitive, curious sides play out on camera. I think I'm very, very similar to the artist that Anthony is.
When we first meet Brianna in the beginning of the film, she's this whip-smart young woman who works in an art gallery, and she's really trying to make a name for herself in the art space. She works for one of these very trendy art spaces that is owned by a white man, and you find her using her voice and her knowledge to expand that space to include artists of color.
When we meet the adult William Burke, you meet him as this sort of kind but strange guy who runs a laundromat on Hudson Street. And he has some secrets to the neighborhood that our main protagonist, Anthony, has a lot of questions surrounding. And Burke begins to provide more and more answers to the legend of Candyman, and also how it has permeated Cabrini Green projects, and how he's sort of beholding and holding the legacy of all that Black trauma. And then he takes it to another level. And then it evolves, because as Anthony has questions about this myth, and Burke provides answers, it turns into something else. I'm very interested in terms of like stories about Black trauma and how it affects us, how we walk around with it, and how we're trying to seek some sort of, I don't know, retribution, trying to seek some I don't know, something to help us continue to walk tall, So I think that he's searching, and Burke is a character that's been waiting for his opportunity to say you can never forget the names of those that have been killed. So I think very much so, it's very much indicative of what we are saying the names of, Philando Castile, you name it, of black men struck down in our community, but community members and leaders, you name it, and how important it is to remember that, to not gloss over it, but you have to remember that in order to move forward.
Nia was really awesome. I knew from the beginning, from the first time that I sat down with her, and I knew her vision was just crystal clear for what she wanted to do with the film. She expresses her artistic vision for the piece to the actors and sort of lets the actors mold it. So she's not extremely precious with the work.
I absolutely adore Nia, our director. She's so smart. To be able to work with a black woman, a young black woman who knows so much what she wants and has beautiful control over the set and over the way she communicates to the actors and what it is she's wanting, and being able to get her visual ideas out to the crew and the people she needs to get that to, but also be able to talk character and the things that are important to us as actors has been really cool.
I think what Nia has really done is she's explored race on all the levels, from the uncomfortable to the downright devastating, and she's kept a love story in there at the center, a tragic love story at the center, like the original as well.
We wanted somebody who could really sink into this world that we were building, someone who could really work with what's ultimately a character piece, and which has a real, I think, strong, dramatic backbone. And so what Nia's work did, and if you see her film Little Woods, was manages to really play with the ideas of serious, trenchant social issues and handling them in a non-didactic way. And at the same time, getting very, very close to characters who are in desperate situations. And it feels like I can't imagine anyone else directing this movie now, having watched it. The amount of life she breathed into it, and how much she shaped this cannot be overstated.
We have developed a sibling-like collaborative bond throughout this process, where we are kind of fearless in the things that we believe in. We have an open exchange of ideas, and that carried through all steps of the process. And really, I mean, very much a testament to Nia's openness to just get into the weeds on every detail of the film in ways that were collaborative with me, with Kara Brower, our production designer, with James McQuaid, our VFX supervisor. Every detail, we turned over every stone to make sure we were doing the most exciting, realistic, mischievous, fun, and honorable decision we could make throughout that process. And so in regards specifically to selecting the artists whose works we commissioned for the film, Nia and I literally did studio visits with every one of these artists, talking to them about their process, looking at work, discussing afterwards. It was almost like we were curating an exhibition by way of selecting these artists.
It's not just about entertainment value, it's also about making something that's going to be important, making something that's going to cause you to think and cause you to have conversations, similarly to the way I guess Anthony would like for his art to speak to the world. When I'm working with Jordan, I always feel taken care of, and I know that we're trying to do something that's going to be classy, that's going to really stand the test of time, and that's going to be important to what's in the zeitgeist right now.
In the same way that with Get Out and Us, what I love that Jordan does is he puts up a mirror to issues we've all already known and we talk about in the Black community or in our communities at large. but it's like a funhouse mirror, you know, very similar to what happens in Us. It's like you're seeing it from a different angle, but then you're seeing it from another angle, and you can't quite put your finger on what you're witnessing and what they're commenting on, but you're like, yeah, oh, I'm gonna have to think about this when I leave the theater. What is really, you know, that I love work that makes you think. I love work that's smart, that really has something to say, and I think, and I know that's what we're doing with our Candyman.
I think Jordan has tapped into something that is so true and honest by going through the lens of genre and going through the lens of horror. In order for us to tell our stories, in order for people to listen, in order for people to be entertained as well, it's like you got to give a little spoonful of sugar. You know, you can't just, you know, I think he's why it's so popular and why he's so committed to this genre, because I think he finds it's a very significant way to tell our stories that's impactful.
Jordan and I have been friends for 25 years, and when it was time for us to go to college, I went to NYU to become a studio art major, and Jordan went to Sarah Lawrence, and his major was puppeteering. And puppeteering has been something that was a big part of Jordan's creative process from when he was young. It's something that his mother is also really passionate about. And so I would say in Jordan's relationship to storytelling, some of its very origins start with that art form. So when writing the script and faced with the daunting challenge of dealing with exposition and flashback material, Jordan had this incredible idea, which is it feels like we should portray these moments in a completely different fashion than just actors acting on sets. So that was the impetus for the notion of how the shadow puppetry came to play.
When we meet Anthony at the beginning of the film, he's an artist. You know, he has a great girlfriend. He just moved in to this great apartment, sort of part of this wave of gentrification in the Cabrini Green neighborhood. And he has had sort of a creative block for 2 years. He hasn't really been able to create, and part of that is because he's grappling with his identity, not just as a person, but as an artist working in a very white industry, as someone who's trying to contend with their past, and in the context of the film, as someone who has to contend with like supernatural entities. So the film sees him kind of go on this journey of self-actualization, sort of a coming of age, but with the added weight of this history that he uncovers. We had 2 artists do Anthony's work because we really wanted to show his early work, and then the work that he makes in the film, and how different he is and how he's being changed, not only through his own like search and journey, but also maybe by demon, ghosts, murderers. Yeah.
In the beginning of the film, you know, Anthony he's an artist who's maybe had a little bit of success, but that success is in danger of fading. And, you know, much like the Candyman ghost, his ambition lies in becoming eternal in fame and success. And that ends up being his tragic flaw. But, you know, he's also a character that has a deep trauma in his past that he's been trying to work out through his art. And so that's, you know, part of his journey is getting to his own truths, you know, while he thinks he's pursuing fame. I had worked with Yahya on Us briefly, so, you know, I told you know, all I did was tell Nia how much I wanted to work with him again. She went and met with him, and they hit it off famously. So, you know, I was I was happy to endorse, but the film was, you know, she really saw him as the guy, and it was music to my ears. He has a bit of a chameleon ability, and at the same time he's a total he has a star quality and a singularness at the same time. But you know, he's one of those guys that can hit notes that you're not expecting, and nuanced notes that you didn't see coming.
Monkey Paw and Nia, we were all really excited and synchronized around Yahya and his and what we knew he could do with this role. And one thing I would say about Yahya, having worked with him on Us and all through the process of Candyman, is that he is an incredibly nuanced performer, that you can feel him internalizing the complicated strife of the character and doing this sort of thing where it feels like he's boiling it down and suppressing it, like a lot of people do, and then it comes out in these ways that feel like the fabric of a real person, dealing with the actual real concerns that they're facing. And that level of a restriction on hyperbole was something that we just kept being like, man, he is going to ground this film in a way that is truly dynamic.
Teyonah is amazing in this movie for a bunch of reasons, but one is that she is so fun. She feels like your best friend as soon as you meet her. And I think there's a warmth to her that is not in any way undercut by how smart she is. And, you know, in some ways, Candyman is very much Brianna's story. I mean, as much as it is Anthony's, in that, you know, she ends up really having to drive this film and ends up having to challenge her own assumptions about what's going on, ends up having to challenge her assumptions about her relationship with the man she loves, and also serves as the skeptic. You know, Brianna's character is really, in some ways, a proxy for us as the audience.
It feels amazing to be a part of the Candyman legacy. I saw Candyman when I was younger, and it was one of those films that I think every kid, or at least every little black kid, had seen and was like, oh no, you know, your brother tortures you, saying it and leaving you in the bathroom or in the room by yourself to deal with Candyman when he comes, that sort of thing. So I have always been frightened of the Candyman legacy and him coming to get me or something, and to actually, you know, years later be a part of continuing that story is really cool for me.
The story of Candyman is so perennial, and that's part of the reason why it's exciting to tell it in any time period. From the origin of the story itself, in the context of the first film, you know, in the 1890s to now, what we're talking about, I think, is the cycles of violence and how history repeats itself and how we collectively grieve and collectively process trauma, which is through stories. So I think it's always a time to tell a story like Candyman, which is, you know, kind of the big tragedy of the tale in the first place. Candyman was just like a real sort of urban legend when I was growing up. It wasn't necessarily just attached to the movie. It felt very present. You know, I went to school right next to the projects. I lived across the street from the projects. And so for us, Candyman was just hanging out over, you know, across the street from us. And so I think the first time I saw it was in elementary school. But this was after I'd already kind of lived with the idea of there being some demon ghost man killing people in the project. So I think my first time seeing the movie was like terrifying, as it is for most people, but I'd already kind of had this lore in my head. So it was kind of like connecting the dots. I was like, oh, that's Candyman. I see, I get it.
The original Candyman written and directed by Bernard Rose, based on a story by Clive Barker. Is one of my favorites. It's a very influential movie for me, mainly because I believe it came out in 1992, so I would have been like 13. And I was a horror fan, and we didn't have a black Freddy. We didn't have a black Jason. We identified with Freddy and Jason. But when Candyman came along, it felt very daring, and it felt very cathartic, and it was terrifying. So this was one of the movies that told me we can that black people can be in horror, even though there are many examples of black people in horror movies. This was one for me that felt particularly badass. The original film, Helen, is a bit of the played expertly by Virginia Madsen, by the way. Helen Lyle is a bit of a fish out of water, to say the least, in the Cabrini Green area, and a lot is focused on her fear and therefore the audience's fear of this space, of this black space. Cabrini Green has been torn down and is fairly gentrified now. And the story that resonated to me now is the story of my fear of the white space, and to be able to explore the quote unquote mirror image or the flip of the first one, to me was a point that made the project worthy in itself, to see the full realization of the conversation that this movie is.
When Jordan and Wynn told me that the script was going to take place in the contemporary art world in Chicago, it spooked me at first because of my long relationship to the contemporary art world, and it made me realize that I was going to have to seriously come correct in regards to my 40-year history of being a part of that world and my long-standing history of lamenting its presentation in film and television. So I knew that in order to produce this film correctly, I was going to have to be as accurate as humanly possible about what it's really like to be a young artist in the contemporary art world, and how we can best portray that within the fiction of our film. For us, this was a really challenging opportunity because it's an IP that is an important one. It was a personally important one for myself and for Jordan, certainly. And it was a film that we bonded over in our adolescence when we were first becoming friends. And it's also one that felt like it was begging for a contemporary kind of response to what Bernard Rose laid down in that original.
I think people like to be terrified. I think, the boogeyman, that thing that we're looking over our shoulder for, personified in the Candyman, but also the sort of game element of it where you can call it up and see. I think people really are enlivened by that. They're really excited. What I really love about what this film does, the updated Say My Name version of it, is that it really, like the original, it talks about so many topical, the politic of the day, the politic in terms of gentrification, what it means to be an artist, what it means to have a place in the world. Candyman is driven by his need for his story to be told. And so I think all those things resonate with us as an audience, and I think it's just a good good show. So people want to see more of it and see what has happened.
I basically looked to history, and they're just stories that I already knew, stories that I found as I was doing research, that I wanted to take inspiration from. I didn't want to take these people's lives and say they're part of the Candyman lore, but just to be inspired by things that had actually happened, and that related to our story. And really, it was because I wanted to show how prevalent, common these horrific events are, and how they're just, there's a straight line from Danny Robitaille to Anthony and all the people in between. So for me, it was really necessary to take inspiration from real life, but also not co-opt a story and put it into our narrative. So I think that was also a balance to strike. How do you maintain tension when as soon as you say a fifth Candyman, the people who said it are going to die? How do you prolong that? How do you make that exciting to watch every time it happens? Also, how do you make someone saying Candyman 5 times interesting every time it happens in the movie? So it was really fun to kind of figure out different ways to do them, and also different scenarios and different people it happened to, and different ways that they say Candyman 5 times, and from a practical workflow point of view, we did a lot of previs, in particular because mirrors were so important, obviously, to the movie, and so trying to figure out how to shoot the reflection of a reflection where in space Candyman would be and all that stuff was really complicated. So previs was really really helpful. And then on the day, it was really about putting all the parts together, and then the actors having fun with their gruesome deaths.
Candyman is an eternal figure, and what we did with this version of it and this telling of it was we focused on the connection. We tried to bring out the connection with the fact that it's an epidemic of violence on black bodies in this country. And Candyman can't just be singular. He's a concept. He's a story. He's a boogeyman, and that means he applies across the boundaries of time. He's eternal.
Cabrini Green today, the place that was once that public housing, is now quite gentrified. The neighborhood has really changed, and with that has come an influx of new money, and the demographics have shifted pretty significantly. And part of what we're trying to say with this movie is that you can't just erase pain. You can't just erase that oppressive tradition by knocking down the buildings and putting up a Starbucks. That still lives there. And for us, our Candyman is about holding on to that truth. And the idea that beneath all of that, there's something that's still unresolved. The art world is about representation, literally. It's literally about portrayal and about telling stories visually. And Candyman, after all, right, is a story that kids tell each other to scare themselves. It's a game that you play when you're looking in the mirror, based on a legend, based on a myth. And for us, the cool thing about setting in the art world is that that's what art's about too. It's about telling a story through symbology and telling it through beauty to be provocative. And our film intends to do that, and I think that's what Candyman is all about.
With Candyman, with talking about unwilling martyrs, I wanted to make sure that in the rush to sort of process what happened and to choose a side and to create sense of something horrifying, that we don't forget the life of the person who was harmed, who was killed. Because a martyr is a powerful symbol, a monster is a powerful symbol, but at the end of the day, if the name isn't remembered, then what are we really talking about? Because the name, the person, the life that was lost, that's the most important thing. And so, in Candyman, it's say his name, say his name, say his name. People say Candyman, but they don't say the name of Danny Robitaille or Anthony McCoy. And so that was commentary on that as well, and also on like what's happening in the movement now, which is so powerful, which is like, say the name of the person, say Breonna Taylor, say Jacob Blake, you know, which I think is really powerful and really important, and what I wanted to talk more about in relation to Candyman, which is that he's not a monster, he's not a martyr, he's Danny Robitaille, a painter who lost his life, or he's Anthony McCoy, a painter and awkward dude who lost his life, you know. I want to talk about humanity. Well, I hope the audiences get, you know, wrapped up in the story. I hope they can engage with and identify with the main characters and to feel what they're feeling. I want them to be scared. I want them to be sad, and I want them to understand, you know, something more than they knew before, or they understood before walking into the film. That might be too much to ask, but I just hope people leave it changed, but at the very least, thinking more.
Audiences for Candyman hopefully will have a really provocative, scary, challenging, and ultimately rewarding time at the movies. It's an experience that I hope will lead to a million conversations afterwards. I hope it'll lead to self-reflection and an understanding that this movie is while fantastical, is about the real world that we live in. And probably the coolest thing possible is that people go home and say Candyman 5 times in the mirror would really be awesome.